Hey y'all, it's been a minute. I've been busy with life, busy with work really, but I had a little bit of time today to talk about today's topic, and that is having the son of the apostle as your minister. And Atlanta had that blessing, that so-called blessing. Between the year '05 and '08, we had Uciel Joaquin as minister here in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, before his arrival, the Church of Atlanta had two deacons, and before then, it was an obrita, as they call it, a little mission, an obrita of Walhalla, South Carolina. And I have to say that the biggest changes I ever saw from an administration, from any minister, came from this man during this time. No one before or after him had the biggest impact that I can remember, that I can recall. In my own personal opinion, was from this man. The changes he brought in was they were big. Um, at the time, we were fairly new as a church and had grew quite rapidly, to be honest. Um, and I believe that was one of the main reasons why Uciel was sent over here. Before he came, the Church of Atlanta, according to him, I remember him telling us that Samuel had heard how willing the church was to help out the brothers in Florida, how willing the Church of Atlanta was to help out construct the temple that's now in Austell Road. And I believe that was one of the main reasons why this we were blessed, as they would call it, to have the son of the apostle here. Because it's already a blessing, as they call it, as the church says. To have a minister is already a blessing. A deacon, a pastor, a high ranking pastor, it's a pretty high blessing here in church in LDM. But to have the son of the apostle, a family member of the election, as your minister, well, that's different. That you're in a special status. So the changes he brought in, from what I can tell, from what I saw, I think were two words to describe this man is competitive and a very well organized man. He brought in competition for the kids. He brought in studies that he brought in different books, brought in his personal friends, brothers and sisters from Guadalajara to help out the kids, to help out the youth, to help out the church, to help out the choir. Everybody got help from Uciel. He brought in competition for the kids, for the youth, with estudios, with studies, playing esgrima, and also having awards such as physical awards and trips too. And at the time, I remember that my focus had completely shifted from schoolwork to church work because I'd really, I really believed that the most important thing in life was the apostle, was the election, and I really believed that that was my purpose, was to serve this man, was to one day hopefully be his right hand man in whatever. And seeing Uciel here was just that beaming light of hope that I could one day achieve. So I remember I me and a lot, it wasn't just me, just having there were other kids that also felt that way, youth that also felt that way. The choir, the changes that he brought in for choir were pretty drastic too. Now his first year, it was very slow. I think he was just feeling out the vibe of Atlanta. But it wasn't until his second and third year where he brought in two different choir directors. Um, for those that don't know Uciel, I think there's some that know that he loves music. He loves choir. Uh, and he wanted the choir to improve, so he brought in two different choir directors. After the first one failed, uh, he brought in a different one because he wanted to continue improving with the choir. He was a very much involved man with the work that he did. I will give him credit for that. The man worked. The man was not lazy. I know I've heard a lot of things from other members that talk about some ministers, that talk about even some family members of the apostle. But this man worked. This man put in the work. He was involved with the choir. He would sometimes go upstairs where we used to have choir studies, and and be there and observe how the choir would improve, how the choir would sing, how the choir director would do. And I remember even my last year, and his last year here as a minister, some of the youth, some of the brothers of Atlanta had to help out paint the streets of Hermosa Provincia to get prepared for the Holy Supper. And he was there the whole night too, because he was in charge of ceremonial at the time. And he put in the work. This man put in the work. He put in the physical work, and I believe even more than that, the changes that he brought in within the doctrine. So you told that the son of the apostle is going to be here, and you're constantly told what a blessing that is. And they'll say things like, hey, you know what that means, right? You have the son of the apostle as your minister. That means when he sees him, he thinks about you guys, about the church of Atlanta. He can pick up the phone any time of the day, any time of night, talk to Samuel, talk to the apostle, and casually drop you guys in and talk about how y'all are doing. You are at the mind of the apostle was the biggest thing they said. You guys are at the top of the mind of the apostle. And we would hear that. So he also would bring in ministers. He would also bring his own studies during the week. He would talk about, he wanted the church to grow in faith, as he would call it. He would bring in other ministers to bring in studies, other deacons, other pastors to help out the church so that the church could grow in faith. And those ministers would say the same thing. You know, they'll talk about whatever topic had to be talked about, but towards the end, you would hear, and this was something that gradually started changing when he would connect any topic. It could be the Holy Supper, it could be the resurrection, it can be anything that's not about the election. Slowly, he would connect that to the election. Now, that's very common nowadays, that everything's connected, even when you pass this thing here in Atlanta. You know, I still remember that usually the youth would get up, if it's a song or a psalm to read by memory, or, you know, at the end it would be like, this song be for the honor and the glory of the Lord, and also for the honor of the apostle, even if it wasn't a song of honor. Very common nowadays, but back then this was like a first introduction, I believe, that was slowly, gradually changing. It got pretty bad to the point that Uciel even had to stand up one day and tell the church that he nor his other brothers or his sisters should be considered prince or princesses, because that implied that they're next in line for the election. Now, I know that sounds a little bit crazy now. Back then, you didn't hear talks like that. You know, we knew it was just the apostle, and his sons were just blessings, a huge blessing. But when the comparison started getting out of hand, people saying that maybe he was a prophet, because he was well respected. The man was well respected here in church. A lot of them. A lot of them. Now, every now and then, you had a couple of brothers who maybe didn't like the way he was running things, and I can look back and see why. Some were very hesitant on how heavily reliant the doctrine was becoming towards the election. But it wasn't like a quick change either. It was a slow, gradual change that I still remember. Every few brothers started picking up and didn't like it, but for the most part, including myself, we ate that shit up. We ate that shit up. We enjoyed it. We loved it. The emphasis with election songs, the importance of the election songs, seeing how the changes of one verse of a choir of a church of a choir song would then have to be moved a little bit by changing the name maybe of Jesus to Samuel. And we would physically hear those changes, because not only would we change the name, obviously, in that sense of a physical change, but we would hear the response of the church. All of a sudden, we changed Jesus to Samuel, the church, glorifying. Because those that were born in church, or know at least something about the church, we know what can raise, what can cause an eruption of glorifying. But at the time, this was kind of new. So the changes from changing the name of Jesus or God to Samuel, or an implication to that, uh, were huge. I mean, looking back, it's small things, but it's really not. And those were the changes that I saw personally firsthand. I was 12, and by the end of 14, they are, in my eyes, in my opinion, the biggest changes that any minister had. And there's really, the things that he brought in, if you want to look at it very objectively, they were pretty good. Competition is good, learning about the stories of the Bible, learning about studies. I don't see anything wrong with that. Now, the things that were really getting out of hand, as we mentioned, was the implication of starting to change the importance of Jesus and God, and connecting everything else that isn't even about the election to the election. I personally ate that. I ate that up. I believed. I'm like, yes, that's how the church should conduct itself. Because by the end of his term, by the end, as if he was president, by the end of his term, I started to believe we need to start changing this perspective, because in order for you to believe in the election and to see him something greater, as I would say, it's all about faith. And faith was that catalyst that Uziel and the rest of the church would use, a good excuse to show that you really believe in the election. And it got to that point that it got very competitive, that people would say, no, I believe in the election. I believe and that's why I got out of hand. Sometimes brothers would say, well, Uziel has to be a prophet. Uziel is this, and that. The sons of Samuel, the daughters of Samuel, or this, and that. And I guess it was a little bit too much for Uziel. That now it's almost kind of common. And the only really negative thing I have to say was that one of the things that he did, that I think was the only thing that a lot of brothers really didn't like, was at the end of, so in the entrance of the Church of Atlanta, on your left and on your right, for the brothers and sisters in those sections, there's a board. You put in announcements, you put in the people who have to clean, the people who have to velar, whatever, etc., etc. But also, there were times that he would put a list of brothers and sisters who would give their offerings, and in numerical order, put in the brother who or sister who gave the most, down to the brothers and sisters who gave the least. And at the time, especially in the beginning, I remember, I mean, what are you going to say? What are you going to say to Uziel, the son of the apostle? It's kind of hard, right, to go up to him and be like, hey, what you're doing is wrong. Because at the time, we were hearing that Uziel was just there fulfilling the wishes of Samuel. He was there on a mission. And to think that Uziel or any of the sons and daughters could commit some kind of sin, could commit an error like that, we had to believe that intention, the purpose of him doing that, was with a good intention. Again, this man knew how to talk. This man knew how to talk. He knew how to manipulate the feelings. And a good example for those that had forgotten, those that grew up in church, I don't know if you guys remember, it was before, I believe it was a 1st of August, where he stood up and gave a testimony and talked about, I believe one of the grandsons of Samuel would play around with one of their old toys. They were old broken toys, according to Uziel. And Samuel one day went up to his grandson and said, why are you playing with these old broken toys? if I can buy you some new ones, you don't need to play with these. I can buy you new ones. Uh, Here, let me grab these toys and throw them away for you while I'm at it, and we can go ahead and buy you some new toys." And the kid started crying, and he said, "No, I can't. I don't want to because these toys, they have a lot of, they're mine. They may be old, they may be broken, but those are my toys. I have memories with these toys." And I remember I ate that shit up too. The whole church, I think you can go back and look on YouTube, the reaction that the church had. I know certainly back in Atlanta, that reaction, at least from my perspective, from my own experience, I was tearing up. I was like, "Fuck, I'm a broken toy that someone still wants to play with, that someone still sees value in me." Uciel knew how to talk. So that's about it that I have to say of Uciel, his tactics, the the perspectives that he brought in was a huge change for the Church of Atlanta. Um, so yeah, that's about it. And I'm not sure if I'm gonna make more videos about these. I've been pretty busy. I wasn't even expecting to make more videos, but we'll see. Uh, but if I do, well then, until next time.